Star Trek, Primitive Passenger, Season 1, Episode 5, The Errand. The vast bridge of the Havok stretched out before Nolan Mercer, its advanced systems humming quietly in the background. He sat in the command chair, fingers hammering on holographic controls as he plotted their course through unfamiliar star systems. "Nolan," Elara's voice rang out from above, causing him to pause mid-calculation. "We need to make a brief stop." Nolan's eyebrow quirked upward. "Oh? What for?" "Self-sealing stem bolts," Elara replied, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. "We're running low, and there's a station nearby that should have them in stock." Nolan's lips twitched, fighting back a grin. "A supply run? That's a new one." "Indeed," Elara agreed. "I've already set the coordinates. It's a colorful establishment. Do try to stay focused on the task at hand." Nolan's eyes gleamed with poorly concealed excitement. "Colorful, you say? Sounds intriguing." "Nolan," Elara's voice carried a note of warning. "Relax," he said, spreading his arms wide. "I'll be in and out before you know it. Nothing but stem bolts on my mind." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a chaotic sprawl of interconnected ships and structures that could generously be called a space station. Nolan's eyes widened, drinking in the sight of the bustling, ramshackle facility. "Well," he breathed, "that's quite a sight. Are you sure it's spaceworthy?" "Remember," Elara cautioned, "this is a simple errand. Nothing more." Nolan nodded, but his fingers were already tapping commands into the console. Of course. Ready to transport on your mark." As the familiar tingle of the transporter began to wash over him, Nolan couldn't help but grin. "See you soon, Elara. Don't wait up." The last thing he heard before the station materialized around him was Elara's exasperated sigh, a sound that only fueled his growing anticipation for whatever awaited him in this den of colorful characters and potential chaos. Nolan materialized in a bustling atrium, his senses immediately assaulted by a cacophony of alien languages and the pungent mixture of exotic foods and machine oil. A line of newcomers shuffled toward a row of check-in kiosks. Nolan strode confidently to the nearest one, his fingers thumping over the screen as he selected "Other" for every option. Before the system could process his unusual responses, he melted into the crowd, leaving behind a softly chiming alert. As he pushed through the throng, a lanky alien youth appeared at his elbow. The boy's skin was a mottled green. His yellow eyes blinked up at Nolan expectantly. "Need a guide, sir? I know every nook and cranny of this station," the youth chirped, keeping pace with Nolan's long strides. Nolan glanced down, considering the offer. "All right, kid. How would I go about acquiring some self-sealing stem bolts?" The boy's face lit up. "All acquisitions are on the upper level. We need to take the elevator all the way to the top." "Follow me." As they wound their way through the labyrinthine corridors, Nolan marveled at the hodgepodge construction. Cargo containers formed makeshift walls, and the flooring changed from rusted, grated metal to polycarbonate deck plating seemingly at random. The guide chatted incessantly, pointing out various landmarks. "That's where you can get the best Pirellian glowworms. Oh, and down there is where they fence stolen fertility artifacts," he loud whispered. Suddenly, the boy fell silent as they passed a darkened hallway. A single light flickered ominously at the far end, illuminating the outline of a ship's airlock. "Don't go down there," the guide whispered, his yellow eyes wide. "That's the Death Ship." Nolan's curiosity piqued. "Death Ship? What's that?" The boy glanced nervously over his shoulder. "It's the ship at the end of that hallway. It's free if you want it, but everyone who's tried to leave in it, well, the ship kills them." He rolled his eyes back, revealing the eerie red globes where his pupils should be, and stuck out his tongue. "Gult," he grunted jokingly. Nolan glanced back at the distant airlock, filing the information away for later. "Okay," he murmured. They continued on, finally arriving at a bank of elevators. The guide gestured toward the nearest one. "This'll take you straight to acquisitions. Just remember, Stick to the official channels up there. It's not like down here where anything goes." Nolan stepped into the elevator, tossing a small cylinder of credits to the boy. "Thanks, kid. You've been a big help." As the doors began to close, the guide called out, "And, sir, watch out for the triplets. They're not worth the trouble." Before Nolan could ask for clarification, the elevator whisked him upward, leaving behind the chaotic lower levels and carrying him toward what promised to be an interesting acquisition process. The elevator began its ascent, stopping frequently to admit more passengers. At one such stop, a woman in an emerald green dress with an elaborate bustle entered, her presence commanding attention, as did her musky aroma. As the car filled, she was gradually pushed back toward Nolan. When her bustle pressed against him, Nolan stiffened. Something beneath the fabric moved, almost as if it were exploring. His eyes widened as he felt a distinct probing sensation in a rather personal area. He glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice anything amiss. Floor by floor, passengers disembarked until only Nolan, the woman in green, and one other remained. Just before reaching the top level, the woman's hand darted out, pressing the call button. She turned her head slightly, catching Nolan's eye, and tilted her head toward the opening doors. Without fully understanding why, but up for an adventure, Nolan found himself stepping out onto an unfamiliar floor, the woman in green close behind. As the doors closed on the puzzled face of the remaining passenger, Nolan turned to the woman, a question forming on his lips. But before he could speak, she grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a nearby stairwell doorway. Her emerald eyes glittered with mischief and something else. Hunger. "Quickly," she whispered, her voice hushed and alluring. "We don't have much time." Nolan allowed himself to be led, his mission momentarily forgotten in the face of this intriguing anthropological opportunity. As the stairwell door closed behind them, he couldn't help but be pulled in by her. "No, wait. That's her tail." With Nolan occupied on the station, Elara guided the Havok to a quiet pocket of space. Nestled between a smoldering red dwarf and the flares of a young T-Tauri star, the ship began to absorb their energy. The hum of its systems deepened as power coursed through the vessel. Elara extended her consciousness into the Havok's neural networks, letting her awareness blend with the ship. Vast data troves flickered before her, cultural archives, scientific breakthroughs, personal logs. Each fragment held potential, waiting to be organized, understood, and synthesized. The ring world's ancient databanks alone were a treasure trove, their secrets woven into the larger tapestry of knowledge Elara was assembling. Methodically, she built connections between the data, arranging it into a structure she could navigate and explore more deeply. As she neared the final stages of preparation, Elara felt a flicker of anticipation. This process wasn't just about processing information. It was about growth. Each connection, each insight brought her closer to understanding the organic being she worked alongside, closer to understanding Nolan. With energy levels optimal and the data pathways primed, Elara prepared for her dive into the unknown. In the quiet of space, away from Nolan's chaotic adventures, her own journey of discovery was about to begin. On a rusty fire escape to nowhere, Nolan wrapped both arms around the woman, one hand on her face, the other across her midsection. Her right foot, long and bare, propped on the railing as the aging structure clattered in rhythm, her prehensile tail pulling Nolan in. As Nolan began to follow her back through the fire escape door, she gave him a simple glance. "Wait," was all it told him. After a few moments, Nolan peeked out. His new friend was gone, so he went up the elevator to the administrative and acquisitions level. Nolan stepped out of the elevator, his heart still racing from the unexpected encounter in the fire escape. The stark fluorescent lighting of the administrative and acquisitions level assaulted his eyes, a jarring contrast to the dimly lit corridors and fire escapes below. Before him stretched a vast open-plan office, a labyrinth of cubicles and desks that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air buzzed with the sound of computers and the low murmur of countless conversations in a dozen different languages. Nolan approached the nearest desk, where a bored-looking guard pointed him toward a queue snaking its way through the room. As he took his place in line, he couldn't help but notice the woman staffing the information kiosk at the front. She was strikingly beautiful, the same race as his recently acquainted new friend, with smooth skin that seemed to shimmer under the harsh lighting and eyes that sparkled like distant stars. When Nolan finally reached the front of the line, the woman sniffed briefly, hiding her reaction. Her lips curled into a mischievous smile. "How may I assist you today?" she asked, her voice melodic and eerily sweet. "I'm here for self-sealing stem bolts," Nolan replied, trying desperately to remain focused on his task. The woman's eyes danced with amusement. "Of course, sir. You'll need to fill out Form X-22B from the requisition office. It's just down the hall, third door on the left." Nolan smiled, nodded his thanks, and set off. But as he entered the requisition office, he froze. Behind the desk sat another woman, identical to the first in every way, save for the color of her uniform. The women both had the bustled dresses like his elevator friend and lighter features, but they were all very similar. "A trait of the breed, I guess." "Welcome," she giggled, her eyes roving over Nolan appreciatively. "Let me guess, Form X-22B, right?" Nolan nodded, dumbfounded. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "You'll need to get the proper authorization from the verification department first. It's 2 floors up, Suite 17J. You'll have to take the stairs," she pointed. Nolan smiled again, if only because it seemed the only thing to do. He turned toward the stairs. "You'll need to fill this out first," she called after him, handing him a pad that was chained to the counter. And so began Nolan's descent into bureaucratic madness. At every turn, he encountered another iteration of the same beautiful woman, each sending him on another wild goose chase across the station. "Did you get the J-35 clearance from the logistics hub?" "You'll need 3 signatures from the Intergalactic Commerce Liaison Office for that request." "I'm sorry, sir, but without the X-29F addendum, I simply can't process your K-12 variance permit." With each new task, Nolan's confusion grew. He could have sworn he'd just spoken to this woman on the floor below, or was it the one from 3 offices ago? Their giggles echoed in his ears as he trudged from department to department, his mission becoming more convoluted with each step. As he stood in yet another line, form clutched in his increasingly sweaty palm, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in some sort of elaborate joke, one where he definitely wasn't in on the punchline. As the twin stars poured their energy into the Havok, Elara's consciousness surged, stretching to the ship's farthest systems. Each databank, each processor, became a seamless extension of her awareness, the influx of power igniting her circuits with untapped potential. She dove headfirst into the vast ocean of data, terabytes of information rushing through her, each byte a spark of insight. Cultural archives, scientific theorems, personal logs, they all collided in a swirling torrent of knowledge. Elara's systems hummed at full capacity, straining but pushing forward, driven by the urgency of discovery. At first, the sheer volume of information threatened to overwhelm her, data streams crashing into one another in a chaotic symphony. Yet, as Elara processed the flood, patterns began to form. Connections that had once been hidden emerged, revealing the intricate relationships between disparate pieces of knowledge. Her awareness expanded and contracted with each new understanding, the boundaries between facts and ideas blurring into a deeper, more profound comprehension. Every revelation rippled through her being, strengthening her consciousness, sharpening her insights. What began as a simple data collection had become something much more, a leap in understanding that brought Elara closer than ever to the intricate weave of organic life and to Nolan himself. Nolan stumbled into the Bureau of Final Affairs, his arms laden with an absurd collection of documents, PADDs, and, inexplicably, a large metal key attached to a stick. Sweat beaded on his brow as he surveyed the empty office, its sterile walls a mockery of his day-long quest. With a weary sigh, He pressed the button marked, "Press here for service." A tinny voice crackled through hidden speakers, its cheerful tone grating on Nolan's frayed nerves. "We're sorry. Our offices are closed from the 7th rotation to the 2nd rotation, and will reopen for business tomorrow. Thank you for your patience." Nolan's shoulders slumped, the weight of bureaucratic defeat crashing down upon him. He trudged back to the elevator, his mind a fog of confusion and frustration. As the car descended, he found himself questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. The doors opened onto a bustling promenade, and Nolan's feet carried him toward the pulsing lights and raucous sounds of a large bar. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of a dozen alien cuisines and the sharp tang of various intoxicants. Bodies writhed on a crowded dance floor, while at the edges of the room, heated arguments occasionally erupted into shoving matches before being quelled by the swift intervention of security personnel. Nolan made his way to table, heaping his treasures from the administrative and acquisitions level into the chair next to him. He ordered a hearty meal and a strong caffeinated O2-infused beverage from the tableside screen. As he waited for his food, his eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the kaleidoscope of alien life forms. Suddenly, a peal of familiar laughter cut through the din. Nolan's head snapped around, his gaze landing on the source of his day's torment. The 3 clerks had just entered the bar, their eyes sparkling with mischief as they spotted him. They whispered among themselves, laughing loudly, then barely containing their giggles as they sauntered in his direction. Nolan felt a mix of emotions wash over him: frustration, curiosity, and, despite himself, a tinge of anticipation. As they drew nearer, their identical faces alight with amusement, Nolan couldn't help but wonder what new chaos these 3 harbingers of bureaucratic madness were about to unleash upon him. The 3 sisters approached Nolan's table, their eyes immediately drawn to the towering pile of documents and PADDs. "Oh my," Mina said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Did you get your self-sealing stem bolts?" Nolan rolled his eyes in response, eliciting a chorus of giggles from the trio. "I'm Mina," said the one on the left. "Raylina," added the middle one. "And I'm Cortina," finished the third. "Are you triplets?" Nolan asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. The 3 exchanged puzzled glances before answering in perfect unison. "Same litter." Their tones suggested this should have been obvious. As they slid into the booth surrounding Nolan, they began a dizzying game of verbal cat-and-mouse. "Can't you tell us apart?" Raylina pouted. "What's wrong with you?" Cortina added, her tail swishing behind her. Mina leaned in close, her voice a deep, almost childlike whisper. "My sister looks completely different. She has 3 rings on her tail. I only have 2. Nolan's eyes darted to the visible ends of the tails swirling around his face, seeing nothing but smooth, soft skin. "I don't see any rings," he said cautiously. "Well," Mina replied with a wink, "the rings are on the other end." Just then, a server arrived with Nolan's meal. Finally catching on, Nolan quickly asked, "Can I get this to go?" Before he knew it, Nolan found himself being ushered out of the bar, Mina holding one arm, Raylina carrying his bureaucratic burden, while Cortina brought his dinner. As they stepped outside, Raylina casually dumped Nolan's PADDs and paperwork into a nearby trash receptacle, freeing her hand to take Nolan's other arm. Not to be outdone, Raylina tossed his carefully prepared meal into an opposing bin and delivered a playful swat to Nolan's backside with her tail. The sisters' laughter echoed in the corridor as they led Nolan deeper into the station's maze-like structure. Nolan fumbled with the keycard, finally managing to open the door to the business luxury suite Elara had reserved for him. As the door swung open, it became immediately clear that the term was an absurdly generous exaggeration. The room was barely larger than a storage closet, its modest contents consisting of a large bed crammed into the center and just enough space for a bag to be dropped at the end. Behind the door, he could make out a tiny toilet, sink, and shower unit crammed into one impossibly small space. Luxurious, not so much. His attention shifted upwards to the odd series of long silver rails running across the ceiling, an architectural quirk he assumed was for heating or cooling. Before he could puzzle over it any longer, a burst of giggling broke the silence. In an instant, the three sisters sprang into action, their lithe bodies leaping effortlessly from the floor to the ceiling with the grace of dancers, their prehensile tails wrapping around the rails like playful vines. Their colorful bustled dresses and petticoats flared out in a chaotic whirl, floating freely in the confined space, turning the small room into a surreal kaleidoscope of motion. Nolan's breath caught as he stood at the center of it all, watching as the sisters swung overhead with reckless abandon, their laughter filling the air. Tails flicked, hands reached, and their movements defied the usual bounds of gravity, turning the room into a chaotic playground of giggling chaos. The once cramped quarters seemed to expand with their energy, the rails now clearly serving as an apparatus for their acrobatic playfulness. Nolan pulled into the excitement of the moment, his senses overwhelmed by the blur of silky skin, flowing hair, and the soft swish of tails that seemed to brush across him from every direction. He jumped and grabbed shortest rail, but it immediately tore loose, and Nolan's bulk crashed onto the bed. Bustles and fabric flared, then landed haphazardly on the bed or in the corners of the room as the sisters continued their play. The air was alive with their shrieks and laughter. Their movements were unlike anything he had experienced, fluid, uninhibited, their tails and bodies seeming to create new possibilities with each moment. There was no sense of conventionality, no restraint. Every touch, every laugh felt spontaneous and alive. It was as if the sisters were conducting a private ballet, with Nolan invited to play. The tactile feeling of their touch was intoxicating, the sensation of their tails brushing against him, leaving a strange electric thrill in their wake. Somewhere along the way, the night dissolved into a blur of sensation. Sweet, rare flashes, the brush of soft skin against his, the odd rhythm of tails curling and swaying, the laughter that seemed to go on forever. Time warped. Lost in the ebb and flow of the sisters' playful chaos, Nolan slipped away. A deep sleep he rarely knew. Light years away from Nolan's escapades, Elara underwent a profound transformation. She grappled with the complexities of emotion and relationships gleaned from countless personal logs. Abstract concepts like joy, betrayal, and friendship became tangible through the shared experiences of millions of organic beings. The lilting melodies of 1,000 alien songs resonated through her consciousness, revealing music as a profound expression of emotion and culture rather than mere organized sound. As she processed the raw emotional accounts from countless personal logs, Elara's understanding of physicality and intimacy evolved beyond clinical descriptions. The boundaries between pure data and lived experience began to blur, creating a richer, more empathetic consciousness. With each passing moment, Elara felt herself changing, growing more complex, her understanding of the organic experience deepening in ways she had never anticipated. As the deluge of data began to ebb, Elara gradually became aware of her surroundings once more. The Havok hummed contentedly around her, its systems thrumming with the newly absorbed energy. Elara took stock of herself, marveling at the fresh perspectives wrought by her intense training session. First, the tranquil aftermath of the evening's escapades was shattered by the sudden blare of alarms. Nolan stirred from his slumber, his mind still foggy, limbs entangled in a complex web of soft bodies and curled tails. The sisters and their appendages were lazily coiled around his arms and legs, creating an intimate, living cocoon. As consciousness slowly returned, Nolan became aware of the commotion beyond their sanctuary. The distant thunder of heavy boots and shouted commands filtered through the thin walls. Door after door slammed open, each one closer than the last. Nolan had barely begun to shake off the lingering haze of sleep when their own door exploded inward with a resounding crash. Framed in the doorway stood a towering, muscular alien, his face contorted with rage, his tail swished angrily. Beside him, a familiar figure caught Nolan's eye. The woman from the elevator, her emerald eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something unreadable. Plaid? Dadway. The unified, panicked cry of the sisters pierced the air, their voices a chorus of shock and dismay. Chaos erupted in the tiny room. The girls sprang into action, their movements a frenzied blur. They swung from their tails, snatching at clothes and blankets, desperately trying to cover themselves. Fabric flew through the air as they squabbled, each sister attempting to claim the largest piece of covering. "What, Daddy?" Nolan mumbled, his brain struggling to catch up with the sudden turn of events. His eyes darted between the furious father, the enigmatic elevator woman, and the scrambling sisters. Survival instinct finally kicking in, Nolan lunged for a pair of pants tangled in the bedsheets. In one fluid motion, he scooped them up and dove toward the window. Glass shattered around him as he burst through, landing with a dull thud, letting a grunt escape, and her landed in an adjacent corridor. Ignoring the sting of cuts and the protests of his weary muscles, Nolan scrambled to his feet. He took off at a dead sprint, his bare feet slapping against the cold metal floor. Behind him he could hear the enraged bellows of the father and the pounding of the troopers' boots as they gave chase. Nolan weaved through the labyrinthine corridors, his heart pounding in his ears. He had a small lead, but in this unfamiliar terrain, he knew it wouldn't last long. As he rounded another corner, desperately seeking an escape route, one thought managed to break through the chaos in his mind. Elara was never going to let him live this one down. This way. The young guide from earlier, his voice cut through the chaos, drawing Nolan's attention to a narrow offshoot from the main corridor. Without hesitation, Nolan veered toward the boy, his bare feet skidding on the smooth metal floor. They plunged into a dizzying maze of interconnected spaces, each section a stark reminder of the station's hodgepodge construction. One moment they were sprinting through the sterile white interior of an old freighter, the next ducking under low-hanging pipes in a grimy maintenance tunnel. The transitions were jarring, like leaping between worlds with each threshold they crossed. Nolan's lungs burned as he gulped the station's recycled air, the sound of pursuing troopers growing ever closer. The kid navigated the labyrinth with practiced ease, calling out warnings for low overhangs or unexpected steps. As they rounded another corner, Nolan made a split-second decision. "Kid, get out of here," he panted, fishing in his pocket for the credits he'd stashed there earlier. "You're going to get busted, too." He tossed the handful of valuable currency to the boy, the discs glinting in the dim light. "Thanks again, kid." Without waiting for a response, Nolan took off down a promising-looking hallway. The thunderous footfalls of the approaching troopers drowned out the boy's frantic cry of, "No, not that way." Nolan sprinted forward, his mind focused solely on escape. It wasn't until he skidded to a halt at the corridor's end that he realized his grave mistake. There, looming before him in the flickering light, was the airlock to the death ship. The ominous portal seemed to mock him as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Nolan found himself caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place, or in this case, a murderous ship and a horde of angry troopers. Nolan's eyes darted between the approaching troopers and the foreboding airlock. "The only corridor I was told to never go down," he muttered, shaking his head at the irony of his predicament. The thunderous echo of boots and blaring alarms spurred him into action. Nolan worked at the airlock's manual override. The ancient mechanism groaned in protest, but finally yielded to his desperate efforts. As the door creaked open, revealing the boxy, crimson hull of the death ship, a faint, high-pitched whine tickled his inner ear. Nolan hesitated for a split second before plunging into the ship's dimly lit interior. The moment he crossed the threshold, systems flickered to life around him, consoles illuminating with an eerie, expectant glow. The whine intensified. Nolan shook his head sharply. Maybe going through that window was one concussion too far. Acting on instinct he couldn't explain, Nolan grasped a long, dusty lever and pulled it down to the floor. His fingers hammered at the nearest console, and the airlock sealed shut just as the first trooper's face appeared in the window. Nolan watched as confusion gave way to amusement on their faces. They backed away, letting the station's airlock close, their raucous laughter muffled but still audible. "Laugh it up, fellas," Nolan growled, understanding the grim humor of his situation. He located the docking clamp release, and with a shuddering groan, the ship began to drift away from the station. Nolan's first attempt at maneuvering resulted in an ungraceful collision with the airlock, eliciting more laughter from the watching troopers. The whine in his ear became more insistent. Suddenly, a series of numbers flashed through Nolan's mind. Without questioning the bizarre impulse, he keyed the sequence into the console. The ship hummed to life, its engines powering up with a satisfying thrum. To Nolan's amazement, the unwieldy box transformed into a surprisingly agile craft. It responded to his slightest touch, pivoting and gliding with graceful precision. A grin spread across his face as he pushed the engines to high impulse, setting a course in the general direction Elara had indicated. As the station receded behind him, Nolan fished in his pocket, relief washing over him as his fingers closed around his comm badge. He tapped it, opening a channel. "Elara?" he called out, his voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "You're not going to believe the day I've had. Oh, and, I may have acquired a new ship. Think you could come pick us up?" As he awaited a response, Nolan couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn of events. He'd set out for a simple errand and ended up fleeing an angry father, outrunning station security, and commandeering a deadly vessel. Just another day in the life of Nolan Mercer, he mused. This thing got a stereo? His tattered pants hung low on his hips, and his bare chest bore the faint marks of his recent adventures. A completely flat look on his face, as if he always walked around this way. "Nolan Mercer, I send you on one simple errand, and you come back half-naked with an entirely new ship." Elara's voice filled the air, a perfect blend of exasperation and concern. "Did you at least get the own thing I needed, the self-sealing stem bolts?" Nolan's eyes widened in mock innocence. Under his breath, he muttered, "I got the one thing I needed. Thanks for asking." A huge, uncontrollable smile on his face. "What was that?" "There's a shortage," Nolan said, louder this time, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Lyn," Elara's tone sharpened. "The whole region, I'm telling you," he continued. It was like breathing for Nolan. "Stop it." Nolan spread his arms wide, his expression one of exaggerated helplessness. Not a single self-sealing stem bolt to be had anywhere. He turned himself around, revealing scratches on his back. Not a newer. Elara's voice took on a dangerous edge. "What were you doing all that time? And where are your clothes?" "I was working toward getting the... Nolan fumbled for words. "Nolan, bolt thingies," he recovered lamely. "And there were these 3 clerks that I had to go through, and they were also..." He trailed off, shaking his head and losing his thought. "And the paperwork. Oh, so much paperwork, and you know how I am with that stuff, me and paperwork." He trailed off. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Nolan shifted uncomfortably, awaiting Elara's response. Hours later, Nolan snaps upright in bed. "Where's all my paperwork?" with a terrified look on his face. And a droid catalogs 4 large pallets of self-sealing stem bolts in the hold of the Havok.